He has been the chairman for VisitBritain for the last 9 years. It's your 10th year. I've got a list of things here that he has done. He graduated from Cambridge. He was a rower. He did the regatta in 70 and 71. Then he went to Mackenzie, Harvard Business School, then to Mackenzie, then to a series of other financial jobs, coming back to Thomas Cook, and then to Visa card as an executive and chairman, and then after that coming to VisitBritain. Christopher's CV is substantial, and I'd like him to actually, as part of his introduction, say a few words about his career, because he'll do a much better job than I do. So, Christopher, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. We're all awake. I've never been in front of an audience this big, so I don't know what you're feeling like, but I feel nervous. I would like to start by just spending a few moments talking about how I ended up here today, because many of you are students or graduate students and you're thinking about careers in tourism. And if you're planning it, all I will tell you is luck and happenstance tends to be more important than planning. But over the years, I hope I've got a few relevant experiences. So I came into the industry completely by accident. I had started a career in financial services and had gone from business school to McKinsey, and I had American Express as a client. And one of the American Express projects was something called the French Experiment. And the French Experiment was an attempt by American Express in the early days of financial services supermarkets to find out what the various pieces of American Express could do with each other and whether they could help build each other's business. And the relevant pieces in France were the travel business, which had long been headquartered in Squilly near the opera and was a home for every visiting American. The card business, you're familiar with the American Express card, and Amex Bank. And they were trying to find ways to work together. And I got into travel. Well, first thing I did in travel was to go and see what the American Express offices in France were doing. Well, the one in Paris was full of Americans doing foreign exchange and doing trips, so that was easy. I thought I ought to go and see something that was less evidently easy. And I went to the American Express office in Le Havre. Now, this was a miracle of tourism. Actually, it was a miracle of office managership, of leadership, because this was in the 1970s. Transatlantic liners had pretty much gone out of business by the 60s. American Express had been in Le Havre because that's where the transatlantic liners landed. And they were there to service visiting Americans. But the business had gone away. And this was in the late 70s, which was 10 years after, the older people in the audience might remember, Tariq Ali, The Revolutions at the London School of Economics, and a book written by a French intellectual called Jean-Jacques Schreiber, who had written a book called The Défi Américain, and it was a period when the French did not much care for the Americans. You can decide whether that's changed, but they didn't much care for the Americans back then. And so to be the office manager of an American Express office in Le Havre with no Americans coming through was a bit of a challenge. And what that experience, meeting the manager, taught me was this is essentially a people business. And I would say to you that if you don't like working with people, if you want to sit in a dark room, the jobs in tourism are limited. This is a people business, and engaging with people makes a difference. And what this gentleman had done was, despite La Défi Américaine, he had become a member of the rugby club, the Rotary Club, any club that did anything in Le Havre. And the reason that people came and did business with him, despite it being American Express, was because his personality was great, and the services offered was impeccable, and there were no local French agencies that were anything equal to that. And that early exposure to tourism both taught me a little bit about one of the most important features of tourism and enthused me about the business. So from there, I ended up being hired from McKinsey to go into American Express. And I was working in the car business in New York and doing business development. Came back to run sales and marketing for Europe, Middle East and Africa, of which tourism was a part. And then, when I got to my mid-30s, I was asked whether I would go and run Amex's travel business in the UK and the USSR. And the USSR came with it because, for reasons deep in history, the American Express UK was responsible for American Express Moscow, and American Express Moscow did all of the ticketing for all of the embassies. It was a great business, actually. We had an American who had previously been in Beijing, which back in the 70s was quite a challenging posting, so Moscow seemed better to him. We had 9 delightful Russian babushkas, ladies who were very effective and efficient at doing all of the ticketing, and a KGB driver, because the KGB wanted to know where all the embassy staff were going. And we had a wonderful lesson in operational detail. I was being taken off by the driver who worked for the KGB and for us, and he was late, and I asked him why he was late, and he said, well, I was copying all the itineraries, manually taking all the itineraries out of the ticket wallets, copying them by hand, so he could pass them on to the Russian authorities. We knew this was going on, the embassies knew this was going on, everyone knew this was going on. So I said, would your life be better if we printed you a duplicate copy and you didn't have to make hand copies yourself? And he was delighted and was extremely helpful there afterwards, and the Russians became very friendly with us because we just made their life easier without any security issue whatsoever. The journey from there included being invited to speak at a conference, the first Apter Conference, Association of British Travel Agents conference that I've been to, which was rather luxuriously in the Gold Coast on Australia, and therefore quite tempting to go to. And as a young 35-ish-year-old person, I was asked to give a speech from my perspective from American Express's standpoint, and I stood up and said, I think we need to be concerned about this thing called the internet because it's going to change our business. And some terribly old, wise people, e.g. younger than I am today, came up to me and said, listen, son, you're new in this business. The internet will never take off. And here we are today in a business which is fundamentally affected by the web in many ways, and we might talk about that when we get to the dialogue piece. I then spent a period of time at Thomas Cook, ultimately as chief executive, as we moved from being a British business to being a German business, and came to terms with the impact of digital. I mean, most careers have things that you don't get right in, and the thing that I didn't get right then, not because I wasn't interested in the subject, but we didn't know how to do it, was to take Thomas Cook, which was a stunningly strong global brand, and turn it into an internet brand. It shouldn't have been brands like Expedia. I mean, God bless, they've done a fantastic job. It should have been Thomas Cook, and we were incapable of seeing this tsunami of change coming our way. Well, actually, that's not true. We saw the tsunami of change coming our way. We weren't sure how to take advantage of it, and as often is the case in the internet world, the entrepreneurs got going, and you know where Expedia is today. Although I do think that Google Flights is giving them a huge run for the money, but we might talk about that later. From there I went to, I went temporarily back to financial services and ran a company called Bradford and Bingley, may it rest in peace. It was a FTSE 100 company when I was there. If you want to talk about financial services, we'll do that later. And then I got lured back into a company called Visa, which you all know as head of president of Visa International. And the card industry is very, very close to the tourism industry, which is where the bookends of my career of American Express at one end and Visa fit in. Because, as you probably worked out, the dirty little secret of the card business is they make a fortune out of foreign exchange. Domestic travel is lovely, but if you're basically taking between 1% and 2% clip on every foreign exchange transaction, it's not bad. And then here is the secret. If an American comes and spends $100 in France, and a Frenchman spends the equivalent of $100 in America, they take 1% to 2% on both transactions, and the net settlement balance is 0. Because the only thing that they settle is the net balance. Right? They offset all of the transactions and they settle the net balance. When I was at McKinsey and we were doing work for American Express, the foreign exchange margin was greater than the profit of the European business. Foreign exchange margin in Europe. So card businesses are very central to both people's ability to travel easily, and travel is very central to those businesses. So having gone through all of that, I got this phone call in, where were we? Towards the end of 2006, saying, do you know anyone who might be interested in being chairman of Visit Britain? Usual headhunters call. And I said, I know people who are interested, but I'm not going to tell you because I'm only going to give you my name, because I'd like to do it. Anyhow, I managed to bluff the examiners. My illustrious predecessor was Colin Marshall, Lord Marshall, who ran BA. Went to the same school as me, although slightly different time, and lived 3 miles from where I did in the Cotswolds. Leading, it has to be said, to the lady who ran the Tourism Information Centre in the Cotswolds, concluding that to be chairman of Visit Britain, you had to go to University College School in Hampstead and live in the Cotswolds. This is not true. So when I retire at the end of the year, if anyone wishes to apply for the job, there is no problem about this. You can come from other places. Colin, when I took over, said, good luck, survive the 4 years that they will give you, and they'll carry you out on a stretcher. And I have to say, and I'm going to get onto some slides in a minute and show you what I do. This is the most phenomenal job. I mean, it is a marvellous opportunity to be ambassador for a country which I'm very fond of, my home, but also it is a glorious industry to work with, because the vast majority of people in this industry that I've met see most glasses as being at least half full. If there is a challenge, it's sometimes that people see a glass and call it half full when actually it's almost empty. So sometimes you have to sort of bring reality to bear. But there's another feature of the industry which is important that you might want to think about. This is one of the most short-term oriented industries I've ever been associated with. And the reason's very simple. The inventory dies every evening. When the plane's taken off, you can't sell the seat. When the night's gone, you can't sell that bedroom. So there is a huge focus on load factors and occupancy rates, which drive profitability. And you will quite often find your career depends on your ability to deliver something in the next month, not to deliver something in the next year or 5 years. Yet the success of the business in which you work depends on someone somewhere, or hopefully more than one person, thinking about what the long-term future is, not falling into the trap of, don't worry, the internet will never come and hit our business. And I would suggest to you, and when we get to the Q&As, we can talk about that, perhaps, that we are not anywhere near the end of the impact of the digital age on our business, both in terms of consumers' communication requirements, of how you interact, and what roles exist. Remember, Visit Britain as a tourism agency used to be the agency, and this is some years ago, that printed brochures about Britain and distributed them from offices on Fifth Avenue in New York. That is for the birds. No one does that anymore. We communicate through the web. So the role of various players and the things that you have to do to be successful, I think, are going through continuous change and will continue to change. So, enough of the background and anecdotes. Let me get closer to what Visit Britain does and take you through a few slides. We don't sell anything at Visit Britain. Well, very few. We sell some Oyster cards and some passes to historic houses. But we convene people. We bring people together. We try and bring people to a common direction behind partially government-sponsored campaigns. Since I've arrived, you benchmark of my success is, since I've arrived, the budget we have has been halved. You might have noticed that government spending has been reduced. We do get money from something called the Great Campaign, which I'm going to talk about. But the budget that we have is 19 million a year and shrinking. We've raised 50 million over the last 4 years from the trade, which has become an essential skill. But compared to many organizations, this does not give you much money to make an impact. And if you only spent the money on marketing above the line, you'd make hardly any impact at all. I mean, our budget in the US, which is our single most valuable market, is less than the tri-state Cadillac dealers' summer campaign. So, you know, and there's quite a lot of competition out there, as you will have learnt, observed, and noticed. So, when I was appointed by a lady called Tessa Jowell, who went on to be involved with the Olympics, she said, how will you measure success if you are given this job? And I said, well, heads in beds, bums in seats, and feet through the turnstiles. Because if you're in the travel industry, that's what matters. And she said, oh, quite interesting. No one's put it like that before. Very helpful. And 18 months later, I realized what a dumb answer that was. It's correct from the perspective of the travel industry. Go back to the short-termism that I described. It's absolutely not how government thinks about this. What I learned fairly quickly was that government had 5 measures of success for tourism. The first was jobs. The second was jobs. The third was jobs. The fourth was tax revenue, and the fifth was regeneration. That's not how the industry thinks about it. So much of the last 10 years has been trying to educate the two about how they should talk to each other. When you are working with taxpayers' money, which is what we work with, you have to be careful. I mean, people say, yeah, why do you try and get a cheap ticket going across to the States? And, you know, a few weeks' time, and here's the craziness of our industry. I have to go to Dallas, San Francisco, New York. I am allowed to go in business class. I don't like paying the full fare, which is £4,500. So I'm flying out to Dublin and going from there, £1,458. Explain that to any sane person. But it's a hint. Use Google Flights, you can save an absolute fortune. Go from Dublin. But you have to be very careful about taxpayers' money, and therefore you have to focus on, or the government would wish you to focus on, what they call market failure. And the essential market failure of our industry is that it is predominantly an SME industry. It's a small enterprise industry, where people's perspective is short-term and close to home. So if you go and talk to a bed and breakfast in Bideford and ask them what's important, they will say it's important to be part of the North Devon promotional campaign, and our market runs to Bristol, and on a good day it goes to Bath. And I said to a nice hotelier who I know, whose hotel I go to reasonably frequently in Bideford, what do you think about what we're doing in Japan? To which his answer was, I couldn't care. So the market failure evident there is we're trying to get tourists from overseas, but most of the people in the industry, not the carriers, most of the people in the industry are interested primarily in local business. And the reason for that is very simple. This is, in the UK, a £125 billion industry, round numbers, of which, I'm sure you know this, but it's important to say it, £100 billion is domestic travel, 25 billion is international. That's if you include the value on British carriers. But in the eyes of the Treasury, domestic is substitutional. What do I mean by that? The Treasury's view of domestic travel is that if someone spends money in a bed and breakfast in Cornwall, the alternative is they will spend it on a pair of shoes from JB Sports. And from their perspective, arguably the tax take is the same in VAT. The international business brings foreign exchange, one of our top 10 foreign exchange earners, brings value-added tax, brings airport departure tax. So the revenue take from international from a government perspective is materially higher. They don't perceive there to be a lot of market failure domestically. I know some of you are in the domestic business, and we should talk about that because I'm not sure they're right, but we need to work out how we're going to reinforce that in their eyes. But internationally, I won't say it's a money machine, but 25 billion of foreign exchange income is important and valuable. Still balance of change deficit on tourism, e.g. the UK, Brits spend more overseas than foreigners spend in our country. But we'd rather have the 25 billion than not. So, let's look at the story, having given you that sort of narrative background. First key set of numbers, 35.8 million visits, which is a record, and 15 is going to be another record. 21.8 billion spend, that's without, in 14, it's more this year, and that's without the revenue from the carriers. So, 6th consecutive year of growth. We are quite pleased with this. The Olympics and everything around that made a huge difference. I'll talk about that in a moment. Those of you who remember the backstory, Australia fell off a cliff after the wonderful Sydney Olympics because they failed to invest after the event. They thought, we've done the Olympics, that's all we have to do. We learned from that and learned from other people, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we did going forward. This is where the people come from, which I'm sure you know. The point I would make here first and foremost is that by value the US is still our biggest market. You'll notice that by value China isn't on the market, notwithstanding the government's commitment to developing long-term Chinese visitor numbers, which is right, it is long-term. For the last 10 years and for the next 10 years, China will not be a major player on the value side, though it is growing very fast, and we're delighted with that. The America story that most people don't know, and including British ambassadors in Washington, is that in 2000 we had 4 million visitors from America. 2.9 million there. We're just creeping back up to 3. So we've lost 25% of the market. So this is a good news and a bad news story. The bad news is we've lost 25% of the market. We've lost more market share in America, which is our most valuable market, than continental Europe has. The big winners have been Latin and South America and across the Pacific. And the motivation or the explanation in part is the psyche of America has changed. They are much more Pacific facing than they were in the year 2000. There is a much more multicultural environment, so the Latin and South America travel is people going home. There's more confidence in travel, although what Trump will do to everything, who knows, God preserve us. So you sit there and you go, that's terrible. And the answer is we used to punch 5 times above our weight in the US. We now punch 3 times above our weight. Our natural market share in international travel is between 3 and 4%. Our market share in America was 15 and is now 9 to 10 of international travel other than travel to Canada and Mexico, because you take contiguous markets out. So the good news is it's still very big and we're still punching above our weight, but one of the big challenges we have, and we might come back to that again in the Q&A, is re-energizing the American market. If you look at where the growth is coming from, the other thing you'll see from that is continental European countries remain extremely important, and Australia is way up there. History, places that were Commonwealth countries, that were part of the empire, still have strong links. The generational issue we're dealing with is those strong links are shrinking. So whilst people might have, in 1950, there was a very, very strong Commonwealth link. You're now getting people who've been overseas, whose families have been overseas for multiple generations, and the link declines, and they are attracted by the many other competitive places that there are. Where is growth coming from? I'm delighted that growth is coming back from, wait a minute, oops, sorry, here we go. We have been working on the US problem as I've described it. Canada, not quite so strong. And why the US and Canada? The best thing that has happened to us this year in the last few months, and in particular, is the strengthening of the dollar against the pound. Whatever anyone tells you, I am not going to stand up here and say that we do this all on our own and it is all VB. First of all, what happens in this industry is done by the practitioners in the industry. We're just there to help. And the second thing is, it's very tough to beat exchange rate trends. They drive what goes on. With the pound down at 139, we will get more Americans, and they will spend more because they will spend the same number of dollars as they were going to spend, and we will measure their spend in pounds. So guess what? When the dollar strengthens, the pound weakens, it looks like bonanza time. When it works the other way, and it wasn't that long ago that the pound was 211 to the dollar, not 140, it works very much the other way, because Americans then look at the UK and go, dear Lord, that place is expensive. And we are not cheap. We sell value, we are not a cheap destination. So for everyone in this industry, exchange rates are important. For us, they're very important. Image is hugely important, and it takes a long time to fix. We might later talk about the image of Bournemouth in the domestic market. Our image is that we punch well above our weight, top 3 as a nation, brand, strong perceptions of tourism, strong perceptions of cultural heritage, perceptions of the people improved by the Olympics when the slightly aloof Brits were seen to be warm and welcoming, and the killer statistic that we have to date failed to have a real impact in, although we are now putting a lot of effort behind this, is that we sit up there in the sort of top 5, top 6 in most of the key metrics in the Anhalt brand index, except in the beauty of our countryside, where we are typically in the low 20s compared to other nations, which makes absolutely no sense at all if you sit in the Yorkshire Moors, if you walk along the coast here. But for some reason, we are working hard at it, foreigners do not think that we have countryside that they should look at, which is a pity and an opportunity. So, let's talk about what we do. Introducing the British Tourist Authority. The British Tourist Authority was formed after the Second World War, and it is still it has always been the governing body for what happens for government involvement. Some chairman of Visit Britain about 5 years ago, e.g. me, said we need to have a clear focus on England, as tourism is a devolved power and there is a strong focus on Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, which as part of the peace agreement that Tony Blair signed does its tourism marketing with Southern Ireland, which makes sense if you're a traveller. London has strong identity sponsored by the mayor, although more of that in a second. The rest of England had lesser of an identity. So we carved out a separate organisation. I'll come back to what's happening while we're rehashing the BTA. The London point's a really interesting one. I had to go and see, ministerial involvement in this industry is never for a very long time, sadly. I've been in this job for 9 years, and I've had 8 secretaries of state and 9 ministers. So we're quite useful on briefing. John Whittingdale, I think, who's my Secretary of State now, I hope and think and pray will be there for a period of time. I think he's found a job that he wants and he likes, and he's good for us. That's great. When I went to see the Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, I better only do the clean part of this story. After his introduction, which was not clean, he didn't. I knew going in that he didn't think much of tourism. He asked me, "What do you think I think about tourists?" And the polite version of what he said is, I said, "I don't know, Mayor, you tell me what you think about tourists." And he said, "I don't give a ... about tourists. They don't ... vote. If you are ever dealing with governments, remember that international tourists do not vote, and most politicians are driven by people who vote." So as my jaw dislocated, he said, "Yeah, but don't worry. I have to deal with the people who depend on tourists because they do vote." It's a tiny difference, but it's a hugely important one in understanding what's going on in the mind of government officials or mayors. Tourists, inbound tourists in particular, don't vote in my constituency, and I spend my life as a mayor or as a constituency MP serving my voters. After the CSR, the Comprehensive Spending Review this year, and the Triennial Review, which is, a Triennial Review is what the government does. It should, by its name, be happening every 3 years, but they seem not to. But periodically, they have what they call the Triennial Review, which asks 2 questions about how taxpayers' money is being spent in a particular area. First is, should we spend it at all? And the second is, could we be smarter in the ways we spend it? So we had a Triennial Review. They decided we should exist. They decided that Visit Britain and Visit England should be separate organisations. And then 3 months later, they did the Comprehensive Spending Review, decided they were going to cut the budget, and realised that if they cut the budget, it was difficult to justify having 2 separate organisations. So we got put back together again. And I won't go into more detail, but the BTA, which I chair, is responsible for both. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about both. Right, you might be able to see the small print. So, mission, building value of tourism to Britain, working in partnership with the industry, nations and regions to generate additional visitor spend. This is a business of partnership. This is an industry of partnership. It is a fragmented industry. It is an SME industry. And if you can't do partnership marketing, you will not succeed. Here's what I learned when I had a good background in American Express, which does a lot of partnership marketing. When I arrived at VB, it's about the only thing that I will claim to have brought to the organisation personally. When I arrived at VB, I asked them about their partnership marketing, and they said, these are the programs we do, and what we do is we go in to see people and ask them if they will pay for our programs. And I said, that doesn't feel like a partnership. That feels like you're going around with a cap out trying to raise money. Partnership marketing is going in and saying, what are you trying to achieve? I might be able to help you do that. And in that tiny change of emphasis lies the success or failure, or at least the beginnings of success or failure of most partnership organisations. The vision is an important statement, not just because it's about inspiration, because travel actually starts, certainly leisure travel, starts with inspiration. There are a lot of places people can go. They need to be inspired to want to come and visit. And our challenge in the UK in particular is that we need them to explore Britain. We have one of the world's great honeypots in London, but it's much tougher to get people outside. Edinburgh does well, the Highlands do okay, Glasgow does well, not that many people go to Wales, and not enough people go outside of London to other parts of England. Partly through lack of knowledge, partly because our transport system is incomplete, partly because if you turn up at York Station as an American family with 2 kids and you think I'm going to go comfortably to York, you will, and I'll take a first class seat at 9 o'clock in the morning, you will drop £750. If you did the same distance on Trenitalia, you will pay €19 and in first class. So we have some pricing, and the Prime Minister has got that one, so we are going to have to deal with that to get people to explore, because one of our other challenges is most foreigners don't drive on the same side of the road as the British do, and they won't do it. They won't bring their cars over from continental Europe. 80% of the transport, if you go to Brittany ferries, 80% of the car transport is Brits going backwards and forwards to Europe, 20% is Europeans going backwards and forwards to Britain. Some things are very profound and need to be worked on in a big way. Strategy, fundamentally, inspiring travellers from overseas to visit and explore Great Britain, using our global network, we operate in 26 countries with people on the ground, to support the promotion of British tourism overseas, advise the government, and get some leverage on public investment. Sorry, that slide's a little small. So, we have a lot of people in 26 markets, and the rest of us go around periodically visiting markets, seeking to influence and harness what other assets Britain has on the ground. So partnership with the Foreign Office, with UK Trade and Investment, with the British Council and the BBC are what are called our public diplomacy partners. We work much better when we work together than we do separately. Often Visit Britain has one person in the country. One hand clapping, as they say, doesn't make very much noise. But if an ambassador reaches out, and if we operate out of government premises, we tend to get more support for what we're trying to do. What are we really worried about at the moment? More investment in our overseas network, focus on digital, I've talked about that. Being commercial, I mean this is a government agency, but it is a very commercial entity, and we have to be more so. When governments ask, how do you know what you're doing is having any impact? We have visitor numbers to talk to, program reports to talk to. But the most simple example is, if Emirates is spending £1 million a year partnered with Visit Britain, let me tell you, there's some smart commercial people looking at what we do in partnership and deciding whether or not to support it. It wouldn't work. Tim Clark and his team would not spend the money. Actually, when we partner with people like BA, we know that they get enough uplift in their response rates on their marketing campaigns. Working together, we get better outcomes than working separately. So that's all part of being commercial. We've been asked to add business visits and events back to what we do, and I've talked to you about working with the government's partners. At the back end of the Olympics, one of the lessons we learned from a couple of Olympic lessons. The first was that the Olympics was a game of 3 halves. Before the games, during the games, and afterwards. And unlike any other nation before, we put all of our money at the back end. Because what you have to do before the games is to persuade people that they still want to come and visit you. What you have to do during the games is showcase the country, and what you need to do after the games is say, now you've seen it on television, come and visit for yourself. And that's the heart of what we've done, which has given us some decent numbers. The other thing we noted was that, as I mentioned before, immediately after the games, everyone goes, oh, you've had enough money, you've had enough support, we're going to go and do something else, build Crossrail or HS2 or something like that. And so our challenge as a government agency was to keep people's attention in the space called tourism. So right on the back end of it, literally as the games finished, we launched our 2020 vision. 42 million, so far so good, we're heading there, and 4.5 billion more spend. If you wonder where the return was from the Olympic investment of 9 billion, we are 1.2 billion a year up on inbound tourism. So other things are giving you payback. There's some great local benefits out near Stratford, but the tourism revenue is coming in. What do we do? Let me talk about the Great Campaign, which came out of a man called Steve Hilton in helping the Prime Minister. Prime Minister noticed that there was little joined-uppedness in what the government was, what Britain was doing overseas, and Steve came up with the idea that we could have a single unifying campaign. It started off going down like a lead balloon because none of the partners wanted to work together. They all liked doing their thing. Typical marketing testosterone. I want to do my thing. I don't want to be party to your thing. Fortunately, the Prime Minister said, you don't do this, you don't get any money. They started the Great Campaign, which is a single unifying campaign, and I'll show you some bits of it, which brought together those public diplomacy partners that I talked about and said, okay, we're in the same business together. The hidden benefit is not just unified marketing, but it's brought those 5 bodies together. And from our perspective in Visit Britain, what we do compared to all of the others is consumer marketing. So the Foreign Office is very good at diplomacy. We don't do diplomacy as a main skill. They're not terribly good at consumer marketing. They now believe that we're not bad at it. So we now help each other, which has made a huge difference. The Great Campaign seized on this very extraordinary and unique opportunity, and actually the real reason that I applied for the job was that we were going to get the Olympics. And when I had been at Visa, I'd been what they call a top sponsor. Visa was a top sponsor of the Olympics, so I was quite close to the Olympic movement. But we have Royal Wedding, Diamond Jubilee, and the Games and the Paralympics. And in terms of impact, I told you we had a budget of 19 million in total, not just for marketing. The impact of the Games, not the core sports reporters reporting, but the 8,500 unaccredited journalists, media guys who came to the Games, generated 3.2 billion pounds worth of PR for Britain. That is worth having, and I have no illusions that what Sedco and Her Majesty and Wills and Kate did are a huge part of the success that we've had. But why would you knock it if you've got it? I mean, I think the thing that we did was recognise where the real leverage was, because that's what got us coverage, and that's what got the inspiration, and that's what's really made London, in this audience, I would say, the hottest city in the world. And I know the French and the Americans will have their own candidate cities. We're certain, no one disputes we're one of the top 3. And if you look at our numbers and the consistency of our numbers, I think London's the top 1. The Great Campaign, you'll begin to see, evolved from just a statement about Britain's break, which we have to be careful about because that has imperialistic overtones in certain countries. So we have to deliver this one quite carefully. But what evolved was a campaign that focused on the things that made Britain different in people's eyes. We do good business, we're great for innovation, Mr. Dyson. We have a wonderful reputation for creativity. We're working on being green. People love our music. They recognise our heritage is important. After 2012, we could claim sport is great. We have a great reputation for culture, for heritage, and we put in there the countryside. People don't see it, but we needed them to understand. So we started to pick these themes out. And as I've suggested, worked across government departments to harness these in everything we did. And so we've been showcasing Britain as a great place to visit. And the campaign has done that. I mean, they reckon that all parts of, we are about half of what we've spent on Great. They reckon that the market value created by the Great brand, Conrad Bird, who runs the campaign overall, would say is something in the order of 1.2 billion. Quite unusual, and the greatest compliment to this is the French are seeking to copy it. We've taken the pillars that are relevant to us: culture, heritage, countryside, sport. We have to continue to work on food. We've made progress. I mean, food in Britain is infinitely better than it was when I was a kid. But imagery lags. It just takes ages. So people still think we do soggy cabbage and squashed Yorkshire puddings. When in fact there are more Michelin-starred restaurants here than almost anywhere other than Tokyo. And when gourmet pubs, gastropubs, are one of the great British inventions. The trick, of course, is, as I've suggested, to get outside of London. So we have Sounds of Great Britain, which was a so-so campaign. Chinese naming. One of my colleagues woke up one morning and said, why don't we get the Chinese to give names to British places? Because there are no Chinese names for them. And so we have wonderful, wonderful Chinese names, which are literal translations of what people see. So, you know, Scotland is the home of men in skirts. And so on and so on. So that has been a huge success in China. And as I said, we are working hard, and I'll show you a show reel at the end on countryside. PR, oops, there we go. The next bit is converting aspiration into sales, because you constantly have this battle of getting onto people's bucket list of a place they want to go to and then getting them to come this year. One of Britain's challenges in that is that a lot of what we do is heritage. And the simple example is, if you say to people, why don't you come and see the Tower of London next year? They will say quite often, well, it's a great idea, but I won't come next year because it's been around for 600 years, it'll be around next year. So events become hugely important in getting people off their bottoms and into a plane to come to Britain. And events of a particular type, and this I would suggest to you is one of the great opportunities and challenges of the digital world. People travel to do what they are passionate about. They travel for experiences. You can do all the advertising you like about golf, and if you send it to me, it goes in the dustbin. What a crazy game. I would never do it. But I know there are lots of people who are my friends who are passionate about golf and go anywhere to do golf. My wife and I happen to be very fond of opera, so we tramp around the world going to listen to different operas. What you are passionate about is what you seek out to find. And so the challenge for a country is not simply to say we're a nice destination, but to migrate into saying the experiences which you are passionate about, you can do in Britain. And you should come and do. If you play tennis and you haven't been to Wimbledon, you haven't played tennis. If you love cricket and you haven't come to the Oval, you don't do it. If you love football, if you haven't been to Britain, forget it. There are very, very many things. The only one we have a bit of a challenge with is hot, sunny beaches. You do beautiful beaches, hot, sunny is a bit more difficult to sell. Interestingly, that is a completely British problem. Foreigners don't come here for the weather. They love it when it's a day like this, but they didn't come here for a hot, sunny beach. They came here for all the other things we do. We have the hang-up about weather. Foreigners are smarter than us. They realise our weather's not the same as Turkey. On hot sunny beaches, you go to Spain or Turkey or Greece. If you want to come and have all the things that Britain has to offer, you come to Britain. Nothing so complicated about that. We spend a huge amount of our time not doing above-the-line marketing, but doing PR. £8.9 billion of advertising value equivalent in the last 4 years. So that included the Olympics, but it's kept going. That is a huge amount of what we do. Why is it important? Because you need to communicate in the language of the audience, not your language. Tourism as an industry is a supply-side mindset still. I'm doing this, if you don't come and buy it, it's your problem. When you turn it around the other way, you say, if you're thinking of going, where are you considering going? What's the consideration set for Los Angelino thinking about going to Europe? And you'll find that one of the consideration sets is, I might go to Asia. So, you have to start to talk in terms of their language and what they're interested in. And we know from brand research that different markets are interested in different things. Some like shopping, some do like countryside. If you market in Germany, you market Cornwall on the back of an authoress called Rosalind Pilcher. Rosalind Pilcherland. If you do Japan, Beatrix Potter works very nicely, thank you. So you have to find out what the perception is and play to the customer. I mean, marketing 101. But so often the industry, and it's partly because it's SME and it's partly because it's domestically focused, does not play to the customer, it just puts the stuff on the loading dock. So our job is to try and help them get the right messages in the right country. One of the challenges there is ensuring that the product is bookable. And this is an example of an opportunity. I mean, if you are a golfer and you want to go to play a links course north and south of the Scottish border, you have to go on a long journey round the internet to find two courses that are maybe 10 miles apart. But on the other hand, there's a guy called Ross Marshall who's built a £50 million golf business in the last few years because he has not been a supply side oriented guy. He said, I think I'll just sell the product that people want, and if those golf got one of those courses is in Scotland and one is in England, that's my problem, I'll fix it so it's easy for you. Interesting lesson about marketing and partnership. I talked about partnerships. We do it with lots of people. I've talked about digital, and I'm going to show you some examples in a minute of the new website and what we're doing. So let's keep going. We do quite a lot to support tourism. The latest thing we're doing, and so far so good, it seems to have, in the markets in which we've done it, it seems to have grabbed people's imagination, and you will see that in a very social media way. We want to turn from putting the seed visuals and moments on to having people sharing their own, because the honest truth is they're much more interested in what they say to each other and what people like them say to each other than they are in what a national tourism agency says. And probably that's the most important understanding. It's not what we do, it's what we cause other people to do that matters. Thank you very much.
Has kindly offered to answer questions.
So the question is, what happens if Britain pulls out of the EU? First of all, I shall reveal my prejudice by saying a lot of people should be sent off to have a lobotomy. Let me just go back one, because I think it's interesting to contrast this a little bit with Scotland. I had that question just before the Scottish referendum, and I was told that I was officially not allowed to have an answer, so I said I'd have an unofficial answer, which is they're voting on who governs Scotland, not where it is. Think about it, it's tourism. What Scotland had to offer wouldn't have changed. Might have had a problem once they'd realised that if they'd separated and oil had gone to $28, they might have had a problem because their tax rates would have gone through the roof, but that's another matter. I think for the rest, there is talk at the moment about exchange, the pound going down to another 20% against the dollar. Well, stand back and wait for the crowds. I mean, that's not a reason for separating, but it would be a hell of a benefit. I think the European one is the more subtle one, because I don't know what emotionally the outcome of all of this will be in Europe. And if we are positioned or appear to be, how can I put it, putting two fingers in the air to Europe and being anti-European, whatever the rational or irrational arguments come in this country, it will be emotion that will affect it, not anything else. I think the risk is that there is a negative pushback, and Europeans say, nah, I've had it with them. And they're a very important part of our tourism budget, so it's not a risk I would willingly take, but it's an unknown, and obviously you have to deal with what you have to deal with. If we got Brexit, and if the pound weakens against the dollar and the euro, we simply redouble our efforts, because that's the world we're in, and for tourism we will just market the pants off value, which is what it will give us. And I think if the vote comes out, we stay in, it's the greatest non-event in everywhere in the world, except where Boris is. I mean, the rest of the world will go, oh yeah, fine, British democracy, interesting thing, move on.
It will generate a lot of media for you as well, in the sense that...
Well, it's going to generate a lot of... I know what I'm getting, the questions we're going to get. We've got a big Explore GB inbound press event at the weekend. No questions I'm going to get. And the answer's going to be the same. It's not going to change the attractions of the country. I mean, you can't export tourism. It's one of the great strengths of the industry. It's here. It's Bournemouth. It's the Lake District. It's the Highlands. They don't change, even if the relationship with Europe changes. And we did quite well in years past, before we had Europe. People still found a way to, before we had a single community, people found a way to come. So I think the impact is more second derivative and third derivative impact on tourism than tourism as a primary impacted activity, apart from the dominant effect of exchange. Currency exchange rates are more important than tax. I think APD is more important than VAT. I know the industry would love a lower tax rate, and as someone who is in part responsible to the industry, I can see why. I am not persuaded that the French have got 100% uplift after dropping their tax rates by 50%. And I am minded, and this is the challenge if you're in my kind of job where you look this way and you look at the government, you look this way and you look at tourism industry. I'm really clear on where the Chancellor is coming from. If we could demonstrate how to raise £3.5 billion from the British taxpayer, he would substitute the new tax for APD. But there are not many people in this room who want to pay this new tax. You know, this is a breathing tax. I mean, £3.5 billion, half of it paid by foreigners. It's not a bad tax. And the industry, and where I come from is we've got to contain this. When APD started, it was a tax to support green investment. I'm sorry, Gordon Brown, no it wasn't. It was a nice tax. And they found out how it is one of the most efficient, lowest cost taxes to raise, because it's raised by the airlines. They just ping it on the tickets and submit. I mean, they have very few people responsible for raising APD tax, airport departure tax. So it's a very, very efficient tax. My desire is to manage the growth so it should never be more than inflation. There was some fine-tuning to be done. As you probably know, the Caribbean felt, because it was done on mileage, that was a problem. It is a big tax on youngsters. Chancellor's taken, Chancellor took £250 million worth of tax away when he made his adjustments to APD. So it's not that we get nothing. But I think the VAT, this government, certainly this government believes in indirect taxation. So it likes VAT because it's a spending tax. It likes lower income tax. So you can keep it, but if you want to spend it, you do this. Would we do better with lower taxes? Of course we do better. But the question that people ought to ask is, unless the lower taxes come from a parallel decision to drop expenditure, where else is the tax going to come from, and is that a better place? People tend to see the Home Office as intransigent and difficult. Actually, there has been progress. They are much further along in understanding. The trick is getting that into value. One of the things we've all failed to do is to sufficiently separate security from visa processing and not conflate the two. They're two separate. I mean, no one doesn't want this country to have good security. It makes it safe living here. I mean, slightly humorously, I mean, people think we have James Bond as the real person, and we are perceived as having good security. And let me find some wood. Long may that last. The visa point, the idea that visa is part of trade, one of our problems, and this is a joined up business issue that we raise regularly, is that the revenue side of education does not hit the Home Office. Visa processing is an expense to the Home Office. So getting them to invest in processing, in simplification, in automation, when they don't get any incremental revenue to speak of, is tough. We're beginning to get some of that. To the bigger point about education, I think there is still a big opportunity to be much more joined up. The British Council sometimes thinks it's competing. Actually, the big story is education in Britain. The story is, why should you come? It's the great moments. Graduating from a British university with a British degree, well done everyone who came here, is a great moment. And we need the opportunity. I'm not giving you a great answer because I haven't said we fixed it. But the opportunity, I think, because of what I see as the power of great, is if we can get great education, it's there, and really wrap round not competing, but delivering a unified voice for what we should be saying, not about your university or another university, but about education in Britain. That's the battle. And I was talking to someone from the British Council who said, what do you think? And I said, I went on your website, I wouldn't buy from it. It's a wonderful piece of information. But how does a consumer, come back to how do consumers think? It's the toughest thing to get ministers to get their heads round, because ministers are supply side and local voters. And so here you've got another example of what do we have to say to persuade the Chinese, to persuade the Afghans, to persuade anyone that they should come and do part of their education here. And that's the battle we have to win, because then they will find their way round. And we start to do that, and we can get joined up government, we can get the Home Office behind it. I think just whacking the Home Office over the head with a 2x4 won't get there. That's my experience of dealing with government. We need a bigger story. Have you give us a pitch for how we use how you can help us use big data? Because that is the secret. I don't need to know who you are. I need to know how to reach into the things that you're interested in so that I can market back to you those things. So go back to the golf example. People who like golf click onto websites about golf. I don't need to market, I mean, I can use golf magazines, but if we want to market a golf experience, it would make sense to go to those people first. That's not what big data, it is exactly what big data does. It's not what the tourism industry does for the most part. So that's a huge step forward. If we could find some help to do that, you're on.
Christopher, a lot of our students...
Applications in a minute.
Yeah, a lot of our students will be graduating. They're looking for advice how to go to industry and how to move forward and how to have wonderful careers and how to help the industry develop. Any advice?
Get the first job, because that's where it starts. If I might be so bold as to say, I mean, when I started out in sales, and I had a Hillman Avenger, which was a rubbish cart even then, full of dog food and flour, because I was working for a company called Spillers. And my patch was Westbourne Grove in London, and I went up and down selling dog food. And I was a Cambridge graduate. And you know what? It's one of the best experiences I've ever had. So don't be proud, because a lot of employers will look for that real life experience. When the guy in the Westbourne Grove supermarket says, I'll buy your dog food, but only if you go and collect my shopping list from the cash and carry, and the light bulb goes on and you go, wait a minute, If I went down Westbourne Grove and caught 5, 6 shopping lists, I could go to the cash and carry, serve all of them, get rid of my load. That's the practical get it done experience that is invaluable. Whatever yours is, you don't have to go and sell dog food. So that for me is first. The second is make sure somewhere early in that career that you get hands-on customer experience, because it is invaluable. It is the North Star. It's the mother lode. It's why people come back, and it's why people come. It's, being on the supply side is important, but being on the supply side without an understanding of how customers think is dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those would be the two things. And the other is, accept, and I think you've accepted it by being, you have made a big step to advance a career in tourism that most people in Britain, and many of you are not from Britain, don't make. You've decided that you would like a career in this industry. It employs 1 in 12 people. It gives you responsibility too. You can run things much quicker here than you will if you go to JP Morgan Chase. And you can make mistakes soon. And making mistakes is how you learn. It's a great industry for young people to get responsible. You go and run an all bar one, or you go and run F&B at a big Hilton, and then you move around. You get real hands-on experience quickly. And what I would say is this is not forgive me, Demetrius, this is not an industry, we are not an industry that does as much engagement intellectually with academics as we should. And I have to tell you that. So if you're going down the academic side, that's a great thing to do, but you're going to have to work, because it's back to this short-term stuff. If you're short-term oriented, if your real thing is bums in seats, heads in beds, feet through the turnstiles, actually a complex regression model on resort selection in Nanjing is not what people are going to get out of bed to do. It's intellectually interesting. So I think people who succeed in this industry, I don't want you to think that you should not have an intellectual base. I hope I still have the one that I got from my education. So it's important, but it's not an industry where you wear academic skills on your shoulder lapel. You wear practical experience, but you use the academic experience and knowledge and expertise to make better short-term, better decisions. And then you'll get to those jobs that you want anyhow. And it's a great industry to be in. You'll have fun.
And you said VisitBritain is recruiting 67 people or something?
Yeah, we need 67 people. Most of them need a little bit more experience than you have, but we're going to talk afterwards about how we can appeal to some of you to help us with some of the problems, challenges and opportunities that we have.
Through placements and consultancy projects and things like that. Thank you very much, Christopher.
There's one at the back.
There's
So
one.
was that a question, or are you just stretching your arm?
Okay, let's take this one.
Take this one. That was
Last
a question.
one.
My name is Christopher Rodrigues from Bulgaria. I'm curious about, so your responsibility is to bring tourists in London, and as you said, you're expecting significant tourist flow in the next couple of years. Do you think London is ready? Because I'm saying London because most of the tourists are going there. Do you think London is ready to welcome those tourists, and do you see some pressures in London, like huge pressures in the next couple of years, based on the tourist flow?
I think London is pretty tourism friendly, and we have not got to the Hong Kong situation of saying we don't want less Chinese in Hong Kong, which is an interesting challenge they've got because of their volume of success. We need to continue to improve 3-star and below. The industry as a whole needs to improve its less expensive offer. I mean, premium hotels we do okay, and there are always more of them, but they're very good. They are pricey, so we need, the Premier Inn and the travel lodges are good because they are brands, but they're not brands that are well known overseas. So we'll work with them to that. And the biggest challenge when you're fragmented, this is the SME problem. You do a really good job. You have a 20-room hotel in Lancaster Gate, which works really nicely. You've upgraded it. How do you get that in front of people? And that's the digital world, which, people do. I think infrastructure is always a challenge. Airbnb is helping with capacity. I mean, the digital economy does have some impact. I worry not about Airbnb because I don't like it. I think it's a very good product. I worry it's not a level playing field, and I'm paranoid about health and safety in Airbnbs or equivalent, because the risk is that there's a major fire somewhere in the world, someone will get killed, and it will be in a place that is not up to standards. And a debate we have with the government is that you have to impose. They say it's local legislation. I say I don't mind whose legislation it is. You can't have hundreds of thousands of people into places where there is the standard of protection of the individual is lower than you would want. So, and the big one you don't know about, or may not know about, that will be an interesting challenge for London in the next 6 years. Have you heard of the Thames Tideway Tunnel? It's the new sewer. Don't worry, we're not selling trips. It's the tunnel under the Thames, not Crossrail, but it's the last big sewerage tunnel in Britain, in London, was built by Bazalgette at the end of the 19th century, after a typhoid epidemic. We're not going to typhoid epidemics, but the sewage system needs to be done. 300, if we don't take it down by river, which is what will happen to most of it, there would be 300,000 dumper trucks a year taking the spoil out of the excavation. And it is going to affect the river. I'm slightly close to this because I'm also chairman of the Port of London. So, but that one, that's a little excitement that's coming that we have to all work our way around.